Australia's tallest building isn't in Sydney. It isn't in Melbourne. It's a 322-meter tower standing directly on the surf at Surfers Paradise, and proposed replacements would push past 390 meters. No other Australian city allowed skyscrapers on its ocean front. Every one of them kept their tallest towers in the CBD and treated the coastline as public commons. The Gold Coast did the opposite. But the skyline isn't even the strangest part. What's strange is that almost nothing about how this city was built follows the rules that built every other city on the continent. The Gold Coast didn't just grow differently, it grew in the opposite direction. In the early 20th century, the stretch of coastline that would become the Gold Coast was barely a footnote. A string of beach shacks and dairy farms clustered around places like Nerang and Southport, less significant than the inland mining towns that actually generated wealth. The area was not even declared a city until 1959. There was no port, no river trade, and no industrial base. Just sand, swamp, and surf. That matters because every major Australian city grew from a specific kind of place. Sydney wrapped itself around one of the finest natural harbours on Earth. Melbourne rose at the head of Port Phillip Bay, where ships could anchor and commerce could flow. Brisbane climbed the banks of a navigable river. Adelaide was planned around the Torrens. Perth grew where the Swan River met the Indian Ocean. In every case, the founding logic was the same. Find a place where water connects you to trade networks and build outward from there. The Gold Coast had none of that. No deep harbor, no navigable river mouth large enough for commerce, no hinterland producing goods that needed a port. The Nerang River was a tidal creek winding through mangroves, not a trade artery. The beaches were beautiful. Beauty does not build cities. Trade does. Industry does. Government investment does. By every rule of Australian urbanization, this stretch of coast should have stayed exactly what it was. A holiday hamlet, a place people visited for a week, not a place 700,000 people call home. But in 1959, one building changed everything. And it wasn't a government office, a railway terminal, or a factory. It was an apartment tower, built by a private developer right on the dunes. The entrepreneur Stanley Corman saw something in Surfers Paradise that most investors dismissed. While Australian cities were building their tallest structures in central business districts, office towers surrounded by banks, government agencies, and transit hubs, Corman built Kinkabul, a 10-story apartment tower that rose directly from the beachfront in 1959. Heritage records describe how it towered over a low-rise beach town, promoted as the prestige address of the Gold Coast. 10 stories does not sound like much now, but against a backdrop of fibro cottages and corner shops, it looked like a spaceship had landed on the sand. What mattered was not the height. What mattered was the location. Kinkabul was built on the beachfront, not in a town center. That single decision set a precedent that would define the Gold Coast for the next 60 years. Every tower that followed chased the same logic: build where the views are best, not where the jobs are. The skyline did not radiate outward from a central business district the way Sydney's or Melbourne's did. It grew in a narrow strip along 60 kilometers of coastline, clustering at multiple nodes. Southport, Surfers Paradise, Broadbeach, Burleigh Heads. There was no center, just views. In Sydney, if you wanted to build tall, you built in the CBD and worked your way outward. The harbour was for public parkland, ferries, and the Opera House. In Melbourne, the Yarra's edge was civic space before it was private real estate. Australian cities treated their waterfronts as shared ground, something to be protected, regulated, and planned. The Gold Coast flipped that entirely. The waterfront was the product. The views were the commodity. And private developers, not government planners, were the ones making the decisions. Corman and the developers who followed him didn't just build upward, though. They built an entirely new coastline, one that didn't exist before they arrived. Starting in the 1960s, developers began dredging the wetlands and tidal flats along the Nerang and Coomera rivers. What had been the mangrove swamp and shallow estuarine mud was excavated, reshaped, and sold as waterfront real estate. The process was straightforward in concept and staggering in scale. Dredges carved channels through soft ground, piling the excavated sand and silt into new land on either side. Where there had been marsh, there were now streets, houses, and private docks. Where there had been tidal creeks, there were now navigable canals wide enough for motor yachts. By the early 2000s, the Gold Coast had roughly 860 kilometers of navigable tidal canals, about 9 times the waterway length of Venice and the largest constructed canal network in the Southern Hemisphere. These were not decorative features. They connected suburbs directly to the Broadwater and the Pacific Ocean through the engineered seaway between the Spit and South Stradbroke Island. A homeowner in a canal estate could walk out the back door, step onto a boat, and be in open ocean within minutes. Think about what that means. The Gold Coast did not adapt to its waterways the way other cities did. Sydney built around its harbour. Brisbane worked with the curves of its river. The Gold Coast manufactured its waterways from scratch. The coastline itself became a real estate product. Entire suburbs sit on ground that was underwater within living memory, land that was literally created by developers to sell. The canals were not infrastructure serving a city. They were the city, shaped by the logic of waterfront lot prices and ocean views. Every canal finger added more waterfront footage. Every waterfront lot commanded a premium. The more canals you carved, the more premium lots you created, and the more money flowed in to carve more canals. It was a self-reinforcing machine, and it worked spectacularly for real estate. Whether it worked for city building was a question nobody was asking yet. So the Gold Coast built its skyline on the beach and carved its waterways from swamp. If you find stories like this interesting, subscribe. But here's what really separates it from every other Australian city who was making these decisions. Because it wasn't the government. Planning scholars have a term for what happened on the Gold Coast. They call it an off-the-plan city, a place built with a laissez-faire ethos centered on property and tourism rather than the civic master plans that shaped Australia's capitals. One academic study describes it as an innovation incubator for the real estate development industry, a place where developers experimented with financial and urban form models that would have been blocked in more heavily regulated cities. Towers on the beach, canal estates carved from wetlands, entire suburbs designed around golf courses and marinas. These were developer experiments, tested on the Gold Coast first and sometimes exported elsewhere. The city's own branding reinforced the model. Australia's playground, the glitter strip. The marketing promised endless growth, leisure, and real estate opportunity. And for decades, that promise delivered. People came for the sun and the surf, saw the developments going up, bought apartments off the plane, and fueled another round of construction. Tourism dollars and property sales became the twin engines of the economy, each feeding the other in a cycle that looked unstoppable. Scholars who study the Gold Coast argue it has more in common with Miami or Honolulu than with Sydney or Melbourne. That comparison is revealing. Miami's beachfront was shaped by private capital chasing ocean views. Honolulu's Waikiki Strip was built by hotel developers, not city planners. The Gold Coast followed the same playbook on the other side of the Pacific. While every other Australian city was shaped by government planners working from a central blueprint, zoning codes, green belts, public transit corridors, the Gold Coast was shaped by private developers chasing the next waterfront lot. That distinction explains almost everything that followed. The skyline on the beach, the canals, the 60-kilometer strip of development with no real center, none of it was an accident. It was the natural outcome of a city built by developer logic instead of civic planning. And developer logic optimizes for one thing, the next sale, not the next generation. But there's a cost to building a city without a plan. Shows up every morning at 8 a.m. %88% of all trips on the Gold Coast are made by car, with an average occupancy of about 1 person per vehicle. Only 3% are by public transport, against a target of 12% by 2031. The Gold Coast does have Queensland's only light rail system, running 20 kilometers with 19 stations and carrying over 60 million trips since it opened in 2014. But it barely dents the car dependency. The reason is structural, not behavioral. Canal estates are cul-de-sac suburbs by design. The waterways that make them desirable also make them impossible to connect with through roads or transit lines. You cannot run a bus route through a canal. You cannot build a train line across a finger of water that was engineered for private boat access. The very feature that made these suburbs premium real estate, waterfront seclusion, is the same feature that traps their residents in cars every morning. Now, stretch that problem across a 60-kilometer linear strip with no central hub. Workers in Coolangatta commute to jobs in Southport. Residents of Robina drive to hospitals in Southport or offices in Broadbeach. The Gold Coast does not have the radial structure of a traditional city where people move inward toward a center. It has a long, thin corridor where people move laterally, and the road network was never built for that volume. Council modeling paints a stark picture. Keeping traffic moving at current levels without a major shift away from cars would require building 16-lane arterial roads, a scenario planners themselves describe as both unrealistic and undesirable. A city built for leisure is now choking on commuter traffic because its linear coastal form and canal suburbs were never designed for a population heading toward 1 million. So the Gold Coast is a city that built its skyline for views, carved its waterways for real estate, and now can't move its own people. But there's one more inversion, and it might be the most surprising one. That isn't for decades, national media branded the Gold Coast a cultural desert, all glitter, no substance. The assumption was easy to make. Meter maids in gold bikinis, theme parks, tacky souvenir shops, schoolies' weak excess. Brisbane, just an hour north, was treated as the mature metro with the real art scene, the serious institutions, the grown-up culture. The Gold Coast was the embarrassing younger sibling. But academic work studying the Gold Coast's demographic and socioeconomic profile found something unexpected. Strip away the skyline, the canals, and the tourist branding, and the population itself looks remarkably similar to other large Australian urban regions. Household incomes, age distributions, education levels, employment patterns, the numbers do not describe a resort town full of transients. They describe a functioning city whose residents work, raise families, commute, and live ordinary suburban lives. The physical form is unique. High rises on beaches, manufactured waterways, no CBD. But socially and economically, the Gold Coast is much like anywhere else in urban Australia. The reputation is the opposite of the reality. The city that looks nothing like Australia is Australia, just wearing a different costume. And beneath that costume, the same pressures are building: growth, housing costs, infrastructure strain that every other major Australian city faces. The difference is that the Gold Coast has to solve those problems inside an urban form that was never designed for them. From the 1980s onward, planners began trying to pivot the Gold Coast toward a knowledge-based economy. The vision was an innovation corridor anchored by health and education precincts. Griffith University's Gold Coast campus, the Gold Coast University Hospital, research centers and tech incubators clustered together in the hope that institutional density would breed diversification. The goal was clear: reduce dependence on tourism and construction, the two sectors that built the city but leave it brutally exposed to downturns. When international travel freezes, as it did during the pandemic, tourism-dependent economies do not slow down, they stop. When property markets cool, construction workers do not find other jobs in a city that has not built other industries. The boom-bust vulnerability is the same one that destroyed western Pennsylvania's steel towns and hollowed out Nevada's mining camps. A single industry city is a city with no backup plan. Progress has been real but contested. The health and knowledge precincts are growing. Student numbers are climbing. Research output is rising. But scholars who study the Gold Coast disagree about whether the momentum is enough to overcome decades of entrenched developer-led growth logic. The branding machine is powerful, selling the Gold Coast as a lifestyle. Destination is far easier than selling it as an innovation hub. And every new tower on the beachfront reinforces the old model, pulling investment back toward views and away from the harder work of economic diversification. The question is whether the Gold Coast can build the bones of a real diversified economy before the next tourism downturn, or property bust exposes the fragility that developer-led cities are built to hide. But there's a deeper threat than economics. one that goes back to the very thing that made the Gold Coast possible. The Gold Coast carved 860 kilometers of canals from swamp and river plain. Entire suburbs were built on land that was tidal marsh within living memory. The engineering was impressive: dredged channels, stabilized banks, raised lots. But that engineering was designed for the conditions of the 20th century, not the 21st. Sea level rise is measured in millimeters per year, but over decades those millimeters add up. Storm surges push higher. King tides reach further. The estuarine dynamics of the Narrane River and Broadwater are shifting as ocean levels change the balance between fresh and salt water. Scientists studying the Gold Coast's canal network warn of compounding risks: erosion along hundreds of kilometers of artificial canal walls, water quality collapse as tidal flushing patterns change, acid sulfate soils exposed by fluctuating water tables, and infrastructure failure in suburbs built on unconsolidated fill. The irony is precise. The very engineering that created the Gold Coast's most desirable real estate, manufactured waterfront lots, is the engineering most exposed to what's coming. Every other major Australian city built its residential suburbs away from the water's edge, keeping coastlines as buffer zones of parkland and public space. The Gold Coast built directly into the risk zone and sold it as premium living. Ongoing disputes over development on the Spit and the Broadwater illustrate the collision in real time. Developers see remaining waterfront land as the next opportunity. Scientists and residents see it as the last buffer between the city and an increasingly unstable coastline. The tension between growth and coastal reality is not a future problem. It is happening now, lot by lot, storm by storm, tide by tide. Come back to that image from the beginning, the skyline rising from the surf at Surfer's Paradise. Australia's tallest tower standing not in a capital CBD, but on a beach. From a distance, it looks like confidence, like ambition, like a city that refused to play by the rules and built something spectacular instead. But now you know what's behind it. Those towers were not just built for views. They were the product of an entire urban model that inverted every rule Australian cities follow. Skyline on the beach instead of a CBD. Manufactured canals instead of natural harbors. Developers instead of planners. Leisure instead of industry. The Gold Coast is heading toward 1 million people, and not one of them lives in a city that was designed to hold them. It was designed to entertain them for a week and send them home. The question isn't whether the Gold Coast was a mistake. It's whether a city built entirely on views, sand, and ambition can survive becoming something its creators never intended: a real city. If you found this interesting, check out one of the recommended videos on your screen and consider subscribing.